Okay, thank you. My presentation is pretty slide intensive, so just make sure all of you on this side can see pretty well if you don't mind. So I'm calling this talk Gumbo because I'm speaking about several things and that I thought you'd be interested in. I didn't want to just limit it to one thing. I should have called it a smorgasbord, but because I'm not Norwegian and I'm Cajun, I decided to call it Gumbo. So we know that you can put, anything in a gumbo. You can put seafood. You can put chicken and okra. I even have a quick squirrel gumbo story for you. So when I was in residency in Little Rock, Arkansas, the secretaries in the Department of Anesthesia decided we should have a potluck, but they always complained because the residents were so poor, we never brought meat. Well, I had a freezer full of 2 packages of squirrel, and you can probably tell where the story's going. But anyway, we had our potluck, and I'm ending up sitting next to one of my female staff doctors, and she's from somewhere in the Northeast, and we're eating, and she goes, "This is delicious." And of course, she had to ask, "Well, what's in it?" And I thought for a second, oh, I better be honest. So anyway, when I said squirrel, I will tell you, I've never seen a chair pushed back from a table that quickly in my entire life. And whether she got to the bathroom or not, I'm not even sure to this day. But anyway, so gumbo is what I'm going to call it. Here's what I'm going to do. And again, several topics. So how sick are we? Why the explosion in sickness, cellular mechanisms of these diseases, ozone to the rescue, and I'm going to finish it off with medical economics, which is going to involve the surgery center that my partner and I started almost 25 years ago. So let's get started. How sick are we? I'm going to fly through these. Here's some health statistics. So this is our infant mortality compared to 12 other industrialized nations. As you can see, our death rate is almost 6 per 100,000. It's higher than England with their socialized medicine, and it's twice that of Japan. So we're not doing too great there. Childhood and teenage obesity is up 4% in the 60s to almost 18% now, so about a 5 times increase. Obesity worldwide, but in the United States, we went up from 13% in 1972 to 35% in 2011. No telling what it is now. So again, that tripled over 40 years. Chronic illness in children, you see it was 12.8% in 1986, up to 54% in 2011. Again, 54% of all children born then, so that again, that's 10 years ago, were sick and with chronic illnesses. Here's a 70-year snapshot of autoimmune and neurologic diseases: Crohn's, type 1, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, celiac, thyroid, autism. I'm going to come back to multiple sclerosis in just a moment, but for now, just realize over the 70 years, the incidence increased 4 times. So you are 4 times, have the 4 times the chance of getting multiple sclerosis now that you did 70 years ago. And I just think most Americans aren't nearly clued into any of these things. This is the number of souls suffering from Alzheimer's since 1900. What the pundits say is that this increase is just because we're living longer. You can trust me on this one. That's not the case. There are many other factors involved. Excuse me, let me get something off my screen here. Okay, so the rate of autism in the U.S. in 1970 was 1 in 10,000. The CD just confirmed that the new rate is 1 in 36. Again, 1 in 10,000 versus now 1 in 36. And what you'll hear them saying is that, oh, it's not true, that the number wasn't really 1 in 10,000 then. That's absolutely not true. The study came from the biggest pediatric study ever, and where 30,000 kids were involved, and they were looking for neuro diseases. So the 1 in 10,000 number is completely solid. There's also a guy, and hold on a second, guys. Sandra, I've lost my pointer. I need to get something off the. Okay, so here, my pointer went away, guys. Mm-hmm. Where'd it go? I don't see it. You know how to get it back? Oh, there it is. There it is. There it is. Just came. I don't know where you got it from. Okay. 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 Sorry, guys. All right, so finishing up on autism. So Dr. Toby Rogers, who has a PhD in political economics, he did his 450-page thesis that shows that within the next 2 to 3 years, we will be spending more on just taking care of autism patients than we're spending on military stuff. So he says just that one thing will bankrupt our economy, if we're not careful. We don't change something. This graph shows a brilliant MIT researcher. Her name is Stephanie Seneff. She extended the graph to 2032, and she says because of the logarithmic growth that 1 in 2 children by 2032 will have autism or be on the spectrum. Okay? And there's all kind of ways when you start diving into this, you start seeing how they misrepresent the truth on all of these things. So you've already got the idea, but likewise, there are increases in renal disease, mental illness, irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, and cancers. If you hang tight, I'm going to give you a little more on cancers in just a bit. But again, you're starting to get the idea. Everything is increasing. It'd be nice if it weren't all bad. But here's life expectancy, and you see over 150 years was increasing. Looks great. Good news. However, over the last 4 to 5 years, our trend has been coming down. So we are now not living as long as we had been. Okay, and I don't want to be all negative, but there is some brand new research that conclusively proves why women live longer than men. And it's because they're smarter. There's no doubt about it. Okay, so now we're going to change gears a little bit and go to, okay, why the explosion of these diseases? So I've shown you a range of diseases. They increase anywhere from 3 to 10 times over this 50 to 70 year period. So why? All right. Logically, there has to be a reason. These diseases don't come out of nowhere. So there has to be a cause. So it's a little like the philosophical argument that there's a God. So every moving thing needs a mover. In the case of God, there has to be an unmoved mover. In the case of disease, something is moving to change from a state of health to a state of disease. So it is caused. So what is the cause, or what are the causes? Many believe that the problems we face today are primarily genetic. Now, I don't tend to agree with that, and I think you're going to see why here in just a second. Okay. All right. So the cause of MS is still unknown. Scientists believe that a combination of environmental and genetic factors contribute to the risk of developing MS. So if you go to these national websites, you go to whether it's MS or any of the other things that I've shown, they're always implicating genetics, but the problem is genetics has so little to do with this. And then, like Vicki was talking about before, all of the epigenetics, that's a part of everything that's going on. So you saw from my previous slide that the incidence of MS has increased 4 times over the last 70 years. So now how can genetics have much of anything to do with 4 times change over a 70-year period, right? So also please note well that I'm not saying that genes cannot be harmed and consequently change. But anyway, so I'm going to give some credit where credit's due. At least they are implicating both environment and genetics. A little bit of honesty go along with it. Okay, so let's look at how mechanisms of disease, but before I go into the mechanisms, I'm going to give you the punchline. I believe that all of the diseases that I've shown you all right, are primarily environmental. And once again, I'm not saying entirely caused by environment, but primarily. So let's look at some science and understand the mechanisms better. So here's a cell. The large pink central structure is the nucleus where all of the genetic information lives. The only other thing that we're going to be concerned about for what I'm talking about today is the oval yellow structures, which are the mitochondria. And you've had at least 2 other speakers talk about it so far. They've talked about the mitochondria and the relationships. So except for red blood cells, all cells have one nucleus and anywhere from 2,000 to 100,000 mitochondria. So what is a mitochondria? That's the basic question. And here's a photomicrograph from an electron microscope. And here's what I want you to remember, that mitochondria are to cells what lungs are to human beings. So without mitochondria take in oxygen and they make energy. Without mitochondria, brain cells don't work, lung cells don't work, heart cells don't work. I mean, you name it. Cells don't work without mitochondria. So one of the biggest changes in my thinking as a doctor over these last couple of years has been to think in terms of cells. And so now I tend to think at the cellular level rather than at the organ level. So instead of dementia being a brain issue, I think of dementia being a brain cell issue. And so that's typically where the pathology is. Okay, so aging and oxygen utilization. So with aging, our ability for our cells to use oxygen declines. But here's where one of the kickers is. So is it really due to aging, or is it because of what's happening to the cell and to the mitochondria? So before I go on, here's just a little point of clarification. Oxygen utilization is synonymous with metabolism. So we all hear I have a slow metabolism. What we really mean are my cells are not efficiently utilizing oxygen. So it's extremely important to realize that this is directly related to the malfunction of the mitochondria. So, and you know, and for all of us here, I mean, do we think this is new information? Well, here is in 1956, so 65 years ago, before I was born, Otto Warburg knew that cancer comes from cells not being able to breathe or mitochondrial dysfunction. So you see just at number 1 there, cancer arises from damage to cellular respiration. So if Otto Warburg was right, and I think he was, then this begs the question, instead of prevention, which involves looking for and eliminating the causes, right? Why is the bulk of the money spent on researching genetics and ways to attack cancer after it is acquired rather than preventing it? And I'm sure all of us know the answer, and it has to do with money, right? So here's an interesting experiment. Here's normal cells in green. It has a normal nucleus, which is green, and the normal mitochondria, which is green. It's kind of the sausage-shaped thing in the cell there. So it divides and produces normal cells. The red cell is a cancer cell. It's portrayed with a red nucleus and mitochondria, so it divides and produces more cancer cells. Now, if you insert a nucleus, so the third one there, so if you insert a nucleus from a cancer cell into a normal cell, it produces normal cells. You know, and I think this one example proves that genetics aren't nearly as responsible for the whole thing as we've tended to believe that they are. Because again, all of the genetics are in that nucleus, and it's not changing the function of the cell. So now you insert a normal nuclei into a diseased cell, and remember, everything else in that cell, the mitochondria and everything else in that cytoplasm, is diseased, and voila, you reproduce cancer cells. So, hold on. Oh well, can't scroll down. Okay. All right. So under this one, so this is from the American Cancer Society. Does sugar feed cancer? Well, this says sugar intake has not been shown to increase the risk of getting cancer, having cancer spread, or having it get worse. So for any of you that want to go deeper, into this topic, this is a book by Thomas Seyfried. He's a cancer researcher at Boston College. It'd be well worth your time. So one of the many points he makes is how glucose restriction helps the majority of cancer patients. So I believe more and more that cellular respiration is the key, right? Not only to cancer, but to all of the diseases that I listed that you've seen before that are exploding, right? So here's the proposed mechanism. You have mitochondrial decay. It decreases your oxygen utilization. Then you see what spins off from that. Increased free radical formation and decreased free radical buffering. The consequences of that are aging and degenerative diseases. So that's what I believe. That's what I think science shows. So our next big question then is, what then harms cellular respiration, right? If we're going to have to know that if we're going to know what we're going to do about it. So I'm going to give you one more term, and then I'm going to explain it to you. But it's important we know this. So EOMD stands for early onset mitochondrial dysfunction. So mitochondria begin malfunctioning long before they decay. So, and there are ways to measure it that are really not that complicated, and I'll get to that in a minute. But for now, what are the causes of early onset mitochondrial dysfunction? Okay, causes of EOMD. Number one is decreased fat metabolism. So in general, what we're going to say is metabolizing fat is good, metabolizing glucose not as good. And then we're going to get into just a minute about whether oxygen is involved or not involved, and how that all interplays. So I hope that you're starting to get the picture, that again, fat metabolism good, sugar metabolism not so good. Under environmental and lifestyle, we can see all of these different things: stress, impaired circulation, toxicities. You've already heard some of that today. Some of the biggest offenders are heavy metals, whether in our mouths or our vaccines, Roundup, which is glyphosate. We have PFAs, we have BPAs, we have EMFs, we have all of these things that are causing harm to the cell and then cause the mitochondria to malfunction, okay? Then continuing on, you can see ischemia, nutritional deficiencies. That can be, vitamins and minerals. And then infections, sleep deprivation, hormonal deficiencies, decreased cardiovascular fitness, inflammation, methylation disorders. All of these things are harming our mitochondria. And that's why I'm telling you, again, over and over, that most of what we're suffering today is environmental. This side is just to illustrate that what's in green is all of the energy production that happens in the mitochondria, and that's 95%. So 95% of our energy production is in the mitochondria. If your mitochondria malfunction, you're in trouble. So, all right, as destruction of the mitochondria happens, the main energy producing mechanism, which uses oxygen, so that's the green line. So normally it's somewhere between 88 and 95%. So as it starts decreasing, as your mitochondria get busted, what happens is the anaerobic or without air mechanisms, which are in red, start increasing. And that is the road to autoimmune disease. It's the road to cancer. And again, all cancer cells are fermenting. And I'll tell you that in a second. So when you're healthy, you burn predominantly fat. So here, all the way on the left is the healthy depiction. So you see that fat is used predominantly, and the anaerobic portion is very small, so most of our energy production comes from oxygen. But as our mitochondria get whacked, two things happen. The fat fuel goes down, and the glucose becomes more and more predominant. And then the next step, by the third time, what we have then is the anaerobic portion is beginning to take over. And again, this is fermentation. So just like with wine, it's you put your sugar in the presence of yeast, and without oxygen, we ferment, and that's what all cancer cells do, is they ferment. Okay, so the test that I want to tell you about that you can use to see and to test your metabolism and your mitochondrial function is based on this right here. So if you burn glucose, for every O2 that you use, you use 1 CO2. So, but when you burn a fat, you have 23 oxygens burned for every 16 CO2. So the ratio of CO2 to O2 is 0.7. So by doing this test, and it's called bioenergy testing, by accurately measuring the oxygen that we consume and the carbon dioxide we produce and seeing the ratio, right, we can see if we're burning fat or carbohydrate. And once again, this will give you of how efficiently our cells are utilizing oxygen. Now, you can even, now Frank Schallenberger, guy that I went to his ozone class a year and a half ago, he has developed some software that you can actually give a person a metabolic age by monitoring what goes in and what goes out. And I'm not 100% sure, but I think that Lumen device that's on the market that people are seeing, they're marketing quite a bit now, that you just breathe in and out, and it tells you a whole bunch of things about whether you're in ketosis or not. So anyway, in addition to avoiding all the things that I just told you cause early onset mitochondrial dysfunction, what else can we do? And that's where the whole thing that I'd like to talk about today, ozone to the rescue. So number one, ozone to the rescue. What is ozone? So simply, it's Kelly. So simply, ozone is 3 oxygen molecules. You see it on the right there. So we've all heard of ozone breathing alerts. That's usually when it's combined with pollution. However, it is true that ozone is harmful to breathe, and that's about the only thing you cannot do with ozone is breathe it, because it can cause harm for some reasons I don't have time to go into. But so here's what happens, and this I kind of give a nature thing so that people kind of understand it. When lightning strikes the stratosphere, it breaks up all the O2s and they come right back together. But then about 1 to 2% of the time, instead of it being O2, it's O3. And when it's in that configuration, that third oxygen is so unstable, it is looking for something else to bind to. It's electronically unstable. It's got an unpaired electron, and if I just let it sit here, it would half of it would go away in 30 minutes. The half-life is 30 minutes. So super unstable. You pretty much have to create it, when you're using it. So in general, O2 is 10 times more soluble than oxygen. And let's see, what else can I tell you about it? There, typically I tell people there are 2 categories of ozone. I apologize, I'm having trouble getting this. Oh, there you go. Okay. So there are generally 2 categories, right? So the first is what happens in vitro. So in vitro, which is in a petri dish or in a or in the air or on a surface like a countertop. It's bactericidal, virucidal, fungicidal. So again, you can clean your countertop with ozone water. You can keep your pool clean. I mean, it does those things. Now, the second category is what it does in vivo. So in a human being or in an animal, okay, in a living being. So, and that's what we're going to concentrate on today. So let me show you a little bit what the process of giving someone an ozone treatment looks like first, so you can kind of picture it in your mind. Okay, so you start an IV. So this is Logan. Logan's not here, but Jana, his mom, is right here. She's a nurse, and so he's got cystic fibrosis. His pulmonary function tests show that he only had about 14% lung function, and they're thinking about, you know, a lung transplant for him at some point. So at this time, I guess I'd given Logan maybe 5 treatments so far, and I think he and Jana would both tell you that his stamina, his energy, his exercise tolerance, you know, have all increased. His digestion has improved because he has gastroparesis also, and his need for supplemental oxygen has decreased. But anyway, you start an IV first. Then you gravity drain about 150 to 200 cc's into the bag. You heparinize it first to keep it from clotting. You drop the ozone gas. So this is medical grade oxygen. It flows through the ozone machine, and you can see I'm drawing it up in the syringe. So that ozone machine, the little white machine back there, is what's imitating what lightning typically does in the atmosphere. So here's Jana giving it back to Logan. So after I've drawn it up, she's just putting it back in his blood, and you invert it a few times. And again, I'll try to show you a little bit about mechanistically what's going on. So, and that's it. Then Logan is getting his ozone blood back. I usually follow it with about 50 grams of IV vitamin C. So ozone is an oxidant, and it's followed by vitamin C, which is an antioxidant. And you always do it in that order. Okay, so here's what happens, and I wasn't sure how much technical stuff to put, but Sandra said, "Oh, this is a woke group, so make sure you hit them." Anyway, here's what happens when ozone goes into the plasma, which is the liquid part of the blood. So you see ROS, that stands for reactive oxygen species, and that immediately goes into the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets, and you can see the things that it does, and again, that's immediate. The LOP stands for lipid oxidative products, and you won't be tested on any of this, guys. But so when you inject ozone in the blood, you see that happen, and what it really does is the lipid oxidative products are what are going to really be penetrating into the organs and doing its big thing. So once the blood is given back, the LOPs are able to go into the cells of all of these organs, and again at the cellular level they do some unbelievable things. So yes, ozone can help improve lung problems, heart problems, nervous system problems, immune problems, on and on. But people always want to know, what can you treat? What can you treat with ozone? And so I've had great success with COVID long haulers, with Lyme, with any kind of breathing issues. I mean, it's been really pretty amazing. But the more appropriate question, once you know the mechanism of how it works, is what wouldn't you use it for? I mean, it really, again, I've seen some just like almost miraculous things. So why wouldn't you? One thing I would like to say though, and make sure, I mean, make sure that you always think of it as an adjunct. And I would never ever think about just treating someone, for cancer without, making sure that nutritionally and detoxing and all the other things were taken care of too. Okay, I don't think you ever want to use it as a standalone thing. Okay. All right. So this is how sugars, glucose, and fats are broken down to make energy in the mitochondria. And again, I know it's a little mechanistic, I guess. But what happens is, the reason I showed this is because one of the main functions of ozone is to turn NADH back to NAD. And that is the main thing, and actually the perfect ratio to drive this forward for your cells to make energy has to be about 700 to 1, and that's one of the main things that ozone does. It turns NADH back into NAD. All right, so now I'm going to switch gears completely to talk about what I do at the Surgery Center of Oklahoma, and so this is about economics, and once again, I'm going to give you the punchline first. So the punchline is the medical system in the United States is broken. And we all have that feeling, but let's see why we all think that. Okay, over this 50-year period, Healthcare spending as a percentage of GDP went up from 5 to 18%. So a 3.5 times increase. I think this graph probably tells the whole story. Over this 50 years, and we'll look at the bottom line, so wages only increased 16%, GDP 168%, national health expenditures 818%. Okay? I think that one graph could be used for the definition of what does unsustainable mean, right? So problem number one, the spending growth is unsustainable. Problem number two is probably thinking that the care can be provided for free. So one of my favorite P.J. O'Rourke quotes is, if you think healthcare is expensive now, wait till you see what it costs when it's free. Another one that I really like too is just a meme, but and then we told them free healthcare. Yeah, right. Okay. All right. Pharmaceutical spending up 4 times since 1980. Now this graph stopped before 2015. So what do you think it is now with all the COVID expenditures? And again, once again, then pharmaceutical spending was at least 10% of every healthcare dollar, and I'm sure it's way above that now with the present situation that we're having. So I'll round up the economic thing with just one other thing. So this was a study from Harvard in 2007. 62% of all medical bankruptcies in 2007 were because of healthcare expenditures. So, the other really alarming thing about that too is that 75% of all of those bankruptcies, of those 62%, were people that had health insurance. So 75% of the 62% had health insurance, and they had to declare bankruptcy because they couldn't afford health care. So, in summary, we're spending more and more, and our health is getting worse and worse. All right? So, is your conclusion the same as mine? Houston, we have a problem. The healthcare system is not in good shape. All right? So, now I'm not saying that what my partner and I are doing at the surgery center is the solution to everything, but I think once I tell you a little bit about what we're doing and explain some of the things that you've maybe never thought of, anyway, I think you'll be proud to know that this kind of initiated here in Oklahoma. If I can advance the slide. Okay. So here's what we're doing to change this. So this photo is from a Time magazine article that my partner Keith Smith and I ran about 3 or 4 years ago now. So here we are, a relatively small facility. And so why all of the interest, right? So, because again, here we are in Time. So here's my partner. He's on Bill O'Reilly, John Stossel, Stuart Varney, NBC, CNBC. The obvious question is, what are we doing to stir up all this interest? And the second question is, what makes the Surgery Center of Oklahoma so different, right? Because, again, we're a surgery center. How can a surgery center be that different? Well, I've narrowed it down to 2 equally important characteristics: transparency and value. So transparency is kind of the easy part. You go online and there you see our all-inclusive pricing. We have over 400 procedures listed now. There's no bait and switch. I always give people the example. If we get in there in any surgery and we have to do more than we thought we were going to have to do, we don't go back to the till and say, you owe us more money. We say, nope, our mistake, that's it. But alternatively, if we get in there and there's more to do than we thought, anyway, did I say that opposite? Anyway, if there's less, we will give them a refund. So we try to make sure that no one ever feels like they've been baited and switched at our place. So, okay. So value is a little more complicated, but because it combines a lot of factors. But as you see here, I think it really is basically formulaic. Anything that increases the quality and decreases the price is going to increase the value. And that's what we are all about. Okay, so here's what we did. Here's our website with our online pricing. So here's a quick brief history of how we started. So we started 25 years ago with about 12 surgeons. As our reputation and our service increased, I mean, people knowing about our service, surgeons really wanting good service. We had so many surgeons join us. In 2003, we had to build a new facility. And then the next stage was about 10 years ago when insurance companies were punishing people for coming to us. Now, we're 6 to 10 times cheaper than the hospitals. So why would an insurance company punish someone for coming to us? And here's what they would do. They would say, well, if you go to Baptist or Hospital X or wherever, and you have your surgery there, you have a $1,000 deductible and 20% copay. But if you go to the Surgery Center of Oklahoma, you have a $3,000 deductible and a 50% copay. So they would scare people. I mean, that's what they do best, really. So it was obvious they wanted us out of business, and so here's what we did. We did what every other business in the United States does, except for people in the medical industry. First, we came up with our labor costs for our surgeons, anesthesia, our nurses. We came up with all of our fixed and our consumable costs. We added that all together for every surgery we do, and then we added like a 10 or 15% margin, and we put it online. So, as an example, if you go to, let's see, I'll show you this as an example. If you go to one of our avatars on our surgery center like here, and let's say you press on the neck, well then all of these neck procedures will display. You'd get these bundled prices. And again, bundled means that includes surgeon's fee, anesthesia, and virtually everything else. So these are our prices, and again, all the consultants tell us that by the time you add everything up together, it's 6 to 10 times less than you would pay if you go to the hospital. So here are a few examples when a local channel did a story on us. Breast biopsy, the cost at Mercy, $16,200. The surgery center is $3,500, but it's not apples to apples. Ours is all inclusive. Ours includes the surgeon, anesthesia, the whole shebang. Theirs doesn't. Here is gallbladder, one at OU, $21,500 at the surgery center, $5,800, and again, not apples to apples. Hysterectomy, Integris, $37,000, surgery center, $8,000. So, okay. Now the major question, and here's my question. Are you ready for the $64,000 question? So, why were, and really still are, the insurance companies punishing folks for wanting to have surgery at our place? It doesn't seem to make sense, and my partner and I, for a long time, we're going, how, right? Because if an insurance company is wanting to do what's best for you, it seems like the line would be outside of our door longer than you can imagine. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little background, and this will take a little bit, but I think it's going to be worth it because this is usually the part that people don't have much of a concept on. So here's the typical medical exchange. There are 3 players in this exchange. You see at the top, there's the patient, but they're most often supported by an employer plan of some sort. Okay. Okay, so if I say patient or employer, that's who I'm going to be talking about. The hospital, I'll call it the Hospital Bank and Trust for obvious reasons. And then 3 is a TPA. So a TPA stands for Third Party Administrator. And so what they do is they administrate a health plan for a self-insured company. So they take in premiums, they pay claims, they authorize surgeries. You know, for the example I'm getting ready to give you, just assume that it's an insurance company. I mean, that's the easiest thing. But they really are different, and they form a much better function if you can get an honest one. Okay, so I'm going to take you through a real example of how the system works. So this is for a cochlear implant, and it's like a hearing aid on steroids. So the price at the surgery center is $30,000. The price at the hospital is $110,000. And these are real numbers taken off of EOBs. So here's how the numbers break down. The cochlear implant device costs both the surgery center and the hospital $27,000. So at the surgery center, we pass on the charge of the implant without marking it up a penny. And then we add about $3,000, so our cost comes out to $30,000. The hospital, though, triples the charge of the implant, so $27,000 times 3, plus they charge about $25,000 on top of that for the surgery, so that's what brings us to the $110,000 number for the hospital. Okay, now here's where the game starts. So this game is called repricing. So let me walk you through the typical exchange, and what I'm going to try to do, and this is hard, and I'm glad I have the slides to show, because I'm going to try to show you where each of the players falls in and kind of what their psyche is as they go through this. So, okay, the hospital bank and trust issues a $110,000 bill. The employer, all the way on the right, sees the bill and panics, right? But then the TPA, working for the employer, supposedly, right, negotiates the bill down to $60,000. So the first point is that the employer, he's going to feel thankful, right? Because he's going to say, "Oh my God, thank you for getting my bill down to $60,000," right? So, but the main point is that none of these numbers have any basis in reality. So the $110,000 charge didn't come from any meaningful cost plus ratio, 0. The $60,000 bill is still $30,000 more than it needs to be. I've told you what it costs us to do it. And so what continues to happen is, the number I want to call your attention to is the $110,000 minus the $60,000. So it's that $50,000 number in blue on the top, right? So the $50,000 is what the TPA tells the employer that they save them in this exchange. So once again, a virtual $110,000 initial charge minus a virtual $60,000, eventual charge, and then the final virtual savings is $50,000. So the $50,000 savings number isn't real, but knowing the number is really the key to understanding what's going on. So the deal that the TPA and the employer have made is that whatever the TPA says, whatever we save you, you owe us 25% of. So in this case, the $50,000 savings, the employer is happy to pay $12,500, thinking that he saved $50,000. Okay, so he's happy to pay that $12,500. Of course, at the end of the year, his premiums go up. So he goes, "Well, what the hell happened?" But anyway, okay, so that's how it works with the TPA. The hospital bank and trust, here's their deal. Because they are considered by the federal government to be nonprofit entities, okay, they can write off that $50,000 as a loss. Okay? So they can actually say, even though we know they made a cool 30 on the surgery, they can say they lost 50, but it's even worse than that. So there's a thing called dish payments, and what happens is that $50,000 also goes into a huge pot that they total up, and at the end of the year, it's their supposed losses. But again, you now know that they're all virtual; none of them are real. And at the end of the year, your and my tax money pays a huge portion of those losses. Okay, so they have it going and coming. Okay, now, so just to give you an example and to make sure I drive home how this works, let's just say that we increase the encounter to the bill to $200,000. So now the difference is $140,000. Well, now the TPA gets 25% of 140, which is $35,000. The hospital now is able to write off 140, say they lost 140 on the surgery, and put that 140 into their dish payment, pot, for the end of the year. And so I think when you see this, the take-home message is both the TPA and the hospitals do better the bigger the bill. That's the problem, right? So now you know the reason for $10 aspirin. Okay, it's broken. Okay. So I hope that was instructive. I mean, a lot of people don't, and it took us a long time to figure it out. We had to kind of live the message to be able to see it. So here's the good news: businesses around the country have direct access to us. So I'm going to give you a typical example, and this is how crazy things are. So the Alaska Teachers Union has a relationship with us. So if a teacher in Alaska will get on an airplane and fly to Oklahoma to have their gallbladder out, the union will pay for them and a companion, pay all their per diems, not charge them a penny, and probably even pay them $1,000 because they will save so much money by doing all of those expenses, flying to Oklahoma, having surgery with us, flying back, than they will if they just stay in Alaska and have their surgery. That's how sick the system is. Okay. So that many businesses have relationships with us is really helping. I mean, people are saving their employees many out-of-pocket expenses. So another example, the Oklahoma County signed up with us in the first year. We saved Oklahoma County like $2 million. And that's the kind of savings that we can usually help people with. So again, the excellent good news for Oklahoma. So all of the facilities that you see here, and many more in Oklahoma City, have imitated our model. So you really should be really proud. So Oklahoma City is really leading the country in this regard, and many people really have no clue of this. But all of these ones listed here are using a model that's similar to ours. And the reason this happened is because 10 years ago, when no one else was doing this, when the TPAs and these businesses saw that there were ways that they could potentially save money, these TPAs were asking us, you know, how do we do this now that we have your services? Now how do we get cancer chemotherapy? How do we get, you know, GI? How do we get imaging? How do we, you know? So anyway, we would give them doctors' names and we'd kind of coach them, and so a lot of these facilities now are doing what we do. Now they're hybrids, but at least they're going down the right track to do what needs to be done. Another thing that's spun off of what we're doing is this Free Market Medical Association. So my partner and another guy named Jay Kempton that owns a really honest local third-party administration firm here in Oklahoma City started the the Free Market Medical Association, and the whole purpose is to educate people about, you know, how to do this, because we were spending hours on the phone trying to help educate people, and anyway, it was really time consuming. So these are the three main groups that the Free Market Medical Association is helping to connect all around the country. You see in the left-hand corner, doctors or any kind of provider can join. So it can be a physical therapist, can be a pharmacist. I mean, it doesn't matter. If you provide health care, you can be in this group. Businesses, we're saving millions of dollars. The third group on the top is typically the group that puts the other two together. So third-party administrators, ERISA attorneys, or brokers. The problem with brokers, insurance brokers make way more of their money from the kickbacks from the BUCAs, which are Blue Cross United, Cigna, and Aetna. So when they're consulting for Chesapeake or whoever they're consulting for, yeah, they're making consultation fees, but they make so much more money from the kickbacks they get from selling the products to the BUCAs. It's anyway, finding honest brokers is really tough. Okay, so I'm going to conclude, and I'd like to thank you for having me. You know, what I really wanted to do is kind of give a panoramic view. Number one, we're sick and we're getting sicker. In this area, I've tried to give you a few ways that we can kind of start hacking, you know, our health. But next, the medical system is broken. And it's primarily because a centralized government and corporations have become a single entity. All right, whether, you know, it's Monsanto and the USDA, or whether it's Big Pharma and the CDC, or, you know, whether it's you know, the insurance companies and their stranglehold on Congress, we have to do something, So, for instance, is it possible for us, all of us sitting here, to defund the bad guys and give up, possibly your health insurance and maybe go with one of the Christian healthcare ministries? I mean, they are great. We deal with those people all the time. They typically pay their bills. They're responsive. The people that are utilizing it, the Christian healthcare ministries I'm talking about, are very responsible. They're not trying to gouge the system. They're looking for ways to save other people money. I mean, our experience has been very good with those. So, I also want to acknowledge that, even though we do have to change some things, I mean, none of us are pure. I mean, I think we're all supposed to be acting, and, I mean, I use myself as an example. I've got a pocket full of dollar bills right now that have occult symbolism, written all over them, but I'm using money just like you guys are. I mean, I bought a mug with one, earlier. So, but anyway, I think we are really called to resist. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, said that in Gulag Archipelago. He said if we had resisted early, I think we could have stopped all of the carnage that happened, in Russia in the 1950s, after the World War. So I think we need to, again, if I were going to give, I guess 3 or 4 things. I mean, we need to trust in God. We need to hack our health. We need to get informed, and we need to resist when we know that there are things that are wrong that we shouldn't, be doing or participating in, because we're perpetuating the system. So, thank you very much. Appreciate it.